Anybody want to volunteer something they came up with? And basically, depending on what you come up with, I'm going to pass out some EDCMs. So it's based on who speaks up. So anybody would like to go first and address the prompt? To what extent is the current state of our nation living up to these inspiring sentiments? What's posted up there in the middle? In what ways does the country fulfill the founding principles of the Declaration of Independence, and where does it fall short? Additionally, what does it mean that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
If spoken, is it given EDCMs
Yeah.
to the group or
No, to the person that speaks up.
I think where we're falling short is the unalienable rights. I feel like we're not fulfilling our declaration at all, especially with who's in office. Especially him trying to take away like our birthright citizenship, or like
Yeah.
you get recently in the news, it was said that it wasn't passed, but because it's dumb, because it's literally in our declaration where we have those unalienable
Not in the
rights.
Declaration, it's in the Constitution under the 14th Amendment. So that's the distinction we want to make, because often those are conflated. Those are two different documents, connected, but two different documents. But you're right, in the 14th Amendment, if you are born here, you are a citizen. Now, that might be an issue for some people, but the thing that you're pointing out there is if it's an issue, that needs to be amended in the Constitution. A president, one person, or a group of people in the Senate or the House of Representatives cannot overturn a constitutional amendment. If that's the case, then the constitutional amendment is just a piece of paper that can be torn up, and it means nothing. It's either followed or it's not followed. But yeah, now, if you're concerned about birthright citizenship, we dodged a bullet because the Supreme Court rejected the notion just based on, it was a tight decision. It was 4-5. So that means that 4 justices in the Supreme Court said, yeah, let's get rid of birthright citizenship. 5 of them said no. And the reason why 5 of them said no, despite what they might feel about that issue, it's like our hands are tied. We can't just cross out the parts of the Constitution that we happen to disagree with today, right? This is why slavery was such a difficult thing to get rid of, because it wasn't entirely protected under the Constitution, but as we'll study later in the semester, it was protected by what's called the 3/5 compromise. And so 3/5 of enslaved people were counted as part of the population in the census, which gave states that had slaves, which would be predominantly southern states, more of a population, and therefore more representation in Congress, which gave them more power. And so when we fast forward to Lincoln, he was concerned about slavery and his private thoughts. He wanted to get rid of it, but as a president, he couldn't just get rid of the provisions that protected slavery. But yeah, someone interrupted you, but this is a concern that, yeah, we're not living up to this. Who does the Declaration apply to, at least principally, within the United States? People, all people. You notice nowhere in the Declaration of Independence, and especially if you read the first 10 amendments, it doesn't use the word citizens. It uses the word people. We are all, right? If they meant just people who are officially citizens, they would have used that word citizen. But they are saying people. This is the Declaration of Independence is inspired by a guy named John Locke, which we'll study in some detail coming soon. John Locke, who was a philosopher in the late 1600s, so like the 1680s in England. And he represents the Enlightenment era. So it's a group of philosophers, mainly in Europe, who are putting forth these universal principles, not principles that are connected to only people who live in Europe in the 1600s. When they write, people like John Locke, people like Rousseau, people like Montesquieu, these are a collection of enlightened philosophers that live at this time. They are arguing that people are endowed by virtue of being alive, by virtue of being an individual, with universal rights that have always been the case, despite what governments they might have lived under. Governments will try to take your rights away, but it doesn't make it right, because we're endowed with those, which we could explore that earlier. But yeah, anything else you'd like to add to that sentiment?
I guess also I feel like we're not fulfilling a lot of our like declaration or even our constitution, like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I feel like a quarter of people aren't happy at all. Like I know
Probably more than a quarter.
Yeah, like I know the pursuit of happiness, like I know like they just brought up healthcare, like the what was it? Like when you go, like healthcare has gone up so much, and I know a lot of people like are not real happy.
Yeah, because I mean, this is a very vague term. Now, John Locke didn't use this term. So the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson sat down with a book called The Second Treatise on Government, a book that John Locke wrote about 100 years prior to the Declaration of Independence. He sat down with that book, and it's a big book. It's very dense. Has anyone ever taken a philosophy class yet? Could you just pick up a philosophy book and just read it and go, cool, I get this? It requires a trained philosopher to go, this is what's being said here, right? Yeah. So it's a pretty dense book. And what's really inspiring about the Declaration of Independence, besides just the words, is that notes Thomas Jefferson to be a very good writer. You could literally just go there and read it within 5 minutes. And that's a mark of a good writer. They can condense very complicated lines of reasoning into one page. What took John Locke to write an entire book on, Thomas Jefferson went, okay, what are the high points of this guy's line of thinking? And he put it in one page. So pursuit of happiness, very vague term. So what John Locke put is we have inalienable rights, natural rights is how he put it. Life, liberty, and property is what John Locke wrote. Thomas Jefferson, it's not as if Thomas Jefferson just screwed up and said, oh man, I meant to put property. He put pursuit of happiness. Why do you think he put pursuit of happiness instead of property in 1776 and what's the implication? Think about in answering that question, think of the implication of the founding fathers writing a Declaration of Independence, declaring their independence from Great Britain.
Pursuing what is like right for them. So it's making them like.
Yeah, but one thing we could say about the founding fathers is they were all property owners. Every one of them owned either vast amounts of property or enough property to set themselves up for life. So why did they leave property in there?
To make it to the common people.
Yeah, exactly. Right? The Declaration of Independence, despite its inspiring sentiments, is a brilliant piece of propaganda. So if he had used the word property, well, the common person might not have property. And okay, they made this document, the Declaration of Independence, they all sign it. They've declared their independence from the most powerful empire on the planet. What do you think is going to follow?
War.
Who is going to pick up the guns, shoot the bullets, and take the bullets in now independent America? What type of people mainly?
Common people.
Yeah, common poor people, right? And so this is a brilliant maneuver here. Pursuit of happiness is a very vague term. This is what makes propaganda effective. Who's gonna read this and go, I don't think we should have the right to pursue happiness? I mean, nobody's gonna argue against that unless you're a psychopath. Of course, that is a stated goal here on life, is to pursue happiness. And that means something different to everybody. So yeah, it's you brought up healthcare. That's something we could all relate to. What some of us in this room might not have insurance, and that's a whole ball of wax in itself. You get sick, and now you have to go to the doctor. You've been putting it off because you didn't want to have to pay $100, $200 just to see a doctor. And now you're in the emergency room where it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. Now, if you have insurance, are you set?
No.
Yeah. There's copays. It's not uncommon that you think you were covered, but you're not covered. And when it comes to healthcare, how do other countries tend to do healthcare?
It's a nationalized thing. It's not a privatized thing.
Yeah, it's nationalized to some extent. Some have hybrids. So like in Canada, it's a hybrid.
The UK.
Yeah. UK, it is completely nationalized. So in Canada, the doctors and the hospitals are mainly private, right? There are some public hospitals in Canada, but basically everybody in Canada pays their taxes, and then you break your leg, you get cancer, and you go to the doctor and you get healed, or at least your ailment is being addressed, right? There's no cashier box. There's no bill. It's just you get it and you pay for it up front with your taxes every year, right? In this country, it is, unless you're on Medicare or a VA, on the VA, if you're a combat vet or a vet, for most Americans, you either pay out of pocket or you have private health insurance. And yeah, not everyone agrees with this, but that could be an ailment, since other countries have figured out how to make their citizens happy. And healthcare is something that makes people happy. I mean, sometimes you get sick and it's not a very happy occasion, but we get a double whammy. Doctor says, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have pancreatic cancer. In America, what's your first thought typically? Yeah, how am I going to pay for this? In other countries, that question doesn't even step into your head. You just simply go, how do I get healthy again? Right? Is there an avenue towards health? Now, some people will argue the capitalism provides incentives. There's an argument to say that we have, if you have access to it, the best healthcare in the world. And that's true if you've got good insurance or you've got good, a lot of money. But there is also an argument that points out that if you don't have access to health insurance and you don't have a lot of money, well, then you are locked out of that premier healthcare that capitalism has provided. And there is an argument to say that capitalism has provided some of the top-notch doctors in the world, research abilities. I mean, people from Canada typically do come to the United States. If you have money in Canada, they're going to go to the United States to get some, because there is, it's not if you nationalize healthcare, all problems are solved. There's waiting lines, right? You don't always go in. It's also true though of our system. I've never made an appointment and to a doctor and they say, come in today, we'll see you. And then you go there and you have to wait 3 or 4 hours sometimes in the waiting room. If you went to a restaurant and they said, have a seat, we'll be with you in 3 or 4 hours, I don't think you would ever go to that restaurant again. But in this country, we've got no choice. You're going to go back to that doctor and just receive that really undignified service of having to wait. So yeah, pursuit of happiness. Very vague. That could mean different things to different people. Anybody else have anything that they came up with like to share? It's real important to set the stage for this course. think about these things. Because yeah, we're gonna study dates and names and people you've never heard of and all of that. And please put your cell phone away. You don't need, oh, I'm sorry. What an asshole. Oh, sorry, this is being recorded. I'll bleep that out in the recording. Sorry, I thought you were on your cell phone. What else? You guys I heard you talking about it. What else?
I think that where it says that all men are created equal,
Yeah.
I think with the current state of everything that's happening, I don't know. Well, it's been on the news that they shot a guy. Some people are saying that it was his fault, and some people are saying it was wrong. I personally think it was wrong because like nobody deserves to be killed over
Yeah.
that.
And regardless if it was his fault or not, so we've had now total that I know of 4 US citizens who have been gunned down by ICE. And the two are recent. Actually, I think there's 5. I could be wrong on that. It could be more. The 2 that I'm thinking of that happened last year, Alex Preddy and Nicole Goodman, I think, or Nicole Good, I think was her name. They were killed by ICE agents, which happens. I mean, that's unfortunate. It's a huge tragedy. Law enforcement sometimes makes mistakes and they kill people unnecessarily. But what should happen if a police officer kills somebody in this country, whether they're a citizen or not?
Investigated properly through the proper channels, documented.
Yeah. And if it turns out through that investigation that it was an honest mistake, right? The guy that he shot and killed had a gun in his hand. So that's not an accident. The cop was defending himself, right? Or unfortunately, the person was caught in the crossfire. Then, depending on how, maybe the police officer was just being egregious and negligent, police officer can be held accountable and go to prison just like anybody else, or be let go due to whatever circumstances were on the ground. What's happened in the case of ICE agents, particularly with Alex Preddy and Nicole Good?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. That is a problem. Because what you're referring to, Marilyn? Mariella. What you're referring to, Mariella, is the concept of due process, which is, I believe, in the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. So due process is indicating we have a process in our justice system. You're accused of a crime, a police officer makes a decision to arrest you. And then what they're doing when a police officer arrests you is they're taking down as much information, gathering evidence. And what do they do with that evidence? If due process is being followed accordingly.
They go report off that
Yeah.
case.
And where does it go?
It depends, civil or criminal.
So let's focus on criminal.
The court.
Yeah, it goes to the court, to the DA. And then the judge will bring you in, you get a preliminary hearing, and the judge is going to assess it. And sometimes the judge assesses the evidence and looks at the police officer, looks at the evidence and going, what are you doing here? There's not enough evidence. This person's free to go. Or sometimes they go, yeah, there is probable cause here. They'll might set a bail and say, pay the bail, you're free to go, and give you a court hearing where you are presumed what still?
Innocent.
Innocent.
Innocent until proven guilty.
That's due process. So this is why it's very important if you ever are in trouble with the law, whether you did it or not, to keep your mouth shut. Even if you did it. You cooperate with the police. You don't be a jerk about it, right? You have to tell them your name. You have to identify yourself. But other than that, keep your mouth shut. Don't help the state, the government, prosecute you. And again, you don't have to be a jerk about it. Eventually, you're going to have to talk to the police. But what you say is, I am 100% willing to cooperate with you, officer, when my lawyer is present. And if you can't afford one, courts will provide you one. Because what a lawyer does is they will sit down with you going, you have to answer that question or do not answer that question. And you don't know. You're scared, right? Someone's accusing you of stealing something or killing somebody or beating somebody up. And you're scared and you want to cooperate, especially if you didn't do it. But even if you didn't do it, keep your mouth shut until there is a lawyer present, because the police officer is trying to do his job and he wants somebody to be held accountable. And he's got to go home at 5, wants to go home to his family, she or he. And if it sounds like you did it, he's going to make a case that you did it. So due process is important, because if it is not, so what we're seeing happening with these people that are being killed, 2 very recently, we have one here in Texas, and it looked like I saw in the headlines somebody in Maine. If that's it, somebody's killed, there's no investigation, these ICE agents are still working, those people have been denied due process. Because what ICE said is, yeah, they were doing something illegal. It's unfortunate. I don't even think they used the word it's unfortunate. For whatever reason, it looked like the law officer was justified in the killing. Well, that short circuits all due process. And it's not just people who are being killed by ICE agents, people are being detained, disappeared, sent to different countries, sometimes countries that are not even their origin, sometimes countries that they've never been to before. Just because you're Mexican American, a lot of Mexican Americans have never been to Mexico. And now you're being sent there. You have no friends, you have no family. What are you supposed to do? And that might be, maybe it's justified. Maybe that person broke some sort of law and that's justified, but these people are just being rounded up and sent. No due process, no ability to presume their innocence and have the state have the responsibility to go through the process, to present evidence to a judge, and for the judge to assess it based on the law. Yeah, so that's a great example of how we're not lining up to unalienable rights. Because if one person or a handful of people are being denied due process, what are the implications for us all? What are the implications for everybody in this country if one person is being denied due process? Yeah, if a police officer, law enforcement agent, local, state, federal, says you committed a crime, says you're not a citizen, and we have this precedent of due process doesn't matter anymore, then, and you're sent to a concentration camp here in this country. We have now concentration camps. Sometimes people call them detention centers. They don't look like detention centers to me. I could be wrong on that, so check me. Yeah, if you're accused of a crime and we don't uphold due process and make sure that our elected officials and our law enforcement agencies are upholding due process without exception, then we're all targets. And if a law enforcement agency says you did it under what's been going on the last couple of years, then you did it. And you will follow the consequences of whatever those individuals within those agencies happen to say is going to happen to you. Whether you're murdered or whether you end up in a prison or sent out of this country. And that's happening to thousands of people. What does it mean to have unalienable rights? Anybody give some of that some thought?
Rights that can be denied.
Even in different states.
Yeah, so can't be denied. So what does that mean exactly?
It's like something you're born with.
Yeah, something you're born with. And yeah, definitely This applies to everybody in every single state. What does that mean? Something you're born with? What is a right that you have that you were born with?
Like, what do you mean? Like, what did
How do you, yeah, what's a right that you're just by virtue of being alive, what is a right that you were born with?
Freedom
So
of
that's
speech?
definitely freedom, but that's pretty vague, right? What'd you say?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. How is that an unalienable right? A right that can't be taken away from you?
Mentioned in the Constitution.
No, besides the Constitution. How do you know you have freedom of speech? You have an unalienable right to exercise your ability to speak. How do you know that?
I mean, because that's just our language, how we're taught. I mean, sorry, I don't understand.
You can
If
say
you're-
anything.
If I have authority, right? I'm the teacher. And your name
We
again?
can say, Brittany.
Brittany.
We can say anything, but it doesn't mean that we're like morally right to say it.
Yeah. Besides the point, right? If I, for some reason, for some crazy reason, said to Brittany, from now on in this course, I don't want you to say a word. Do I really have the ability to do that to you?
No.
I mean, you might go, well, shoot, this crazy teacher has leverage on my grade. I'll listen to him. But you would know that, okay, there's something weird going on here. This wacko just told me I can't.
Abuse of power.
It's abuse of power, right? I can't physically go into you and take your ability to talk.
Right.
You're born with that. That's what we do. We talk. And so that's what we mean by inalienable rights, the right of assembly. Well, that just means, well, I've got legs. I could assemble wherever I want. And if the state, the government says you can't go there, well, maybe there's a reason for that. And we'll talk a bit about some of the principles that are in the Declaration of Independence based on this guy in just a second. Well, sometimes that's the case. So John Locke, which the Declaration again is based on, his writings, refers to what's referred to as a social contract. So yes, you mentioned that, yes, you might say something. So freedom of speech is a funny one because you often hear people who know that what they are saying is offensive and they will claim, I have freedom of speech. Well, of course you do. But what expectation don't you have if you say something that you know is going to be offensive?
You're not gonna be harmed by others.
Yeah, and not maybe physically harmed, but somebody might say to you, hey, you just blurted out the N-word in a classroom. Somebody might go, dude, that ain't cool. Why did you say that? I'm offended that you said that. Freedom of speech, right? That's not what we're talking about here.
Social consequences?
Yeah, those are social consequences, right? You hear comedians say this all the time. They say something offensive on the stage, it offends somebody, and they claim, I have freedom of speech. Of course you do. What freedom of speech is meaning is that it's a social contract that the government doesn't have the right to say you can't say those words, right? So you could be offensive all you want, but yeah, you might get social consequences for that. Now there are certain cases where there are things you can't say in certain circumstances. Does anyone know where our freedom of speech is curtailed, that we, as a society, within the social contract, we all agree when it comes to freedom of speech?
Definitely in school, you can't promote any of your own personal like values or religious beliefs. Like as far as teachers can't exactly say what they would like to say. I mean, you guys can't exactly have your own personal opinions like in your classrooms.
You can have your personal opinion in the classroom. I could have my opinion in the classroom, but definitely I can't leverage it that you must agree with my opinion, and that's part of your grade. That would be something. Now, not necessarily the government would come down on me, although they could. But if I started being weird and start saying that here are my political beliefs, here are people I'm going to vote for, here's the church I attend, and for your grade, you have to agree. I mean, that would be insane, but that would be a thing that we would all immediately recognize, that there's something weird going on in this classroom. This teacher is telling me who to vote for. He's telling me that if I want further credit in this course, I have to go to his church. So that's one way, right? So in the classroom, you decide that. you have the ability in a crowded theater to yell fire, right? You have the ability to fire. You have the ability to say that, but
It's not right.
it's not right because what might you cause?
Mayhem.
Panic, yeah.
Yeah, people in a dark theater might just start trampling each other. There's a fire, I'm getting out of here. Right? So if you do something stupid like that, the government can hold you accountable. You endangered people.
Or on an airplane saying
Yeah,
with, like,
I got a bomb.
Yeah.
I was just kidding. Freedom of speech. No, you freaked everybody out. You made the plane turn around. You are going to be held criminally accountable for that. Freedom of speech. No. Credibly threatening somebody's life. So what that's all pointing to is a social contract. And so what John Locke argued is that we are born free. We are born with the ability to talk, to move around, motion, those kinds of things. And before civilization, more or less, there were no constraints on that because we were pockets of tribes and people. And that is true. So when you study Native Americans as Europeans are coming over here, we have this idea that we're a very free people and all of that, and we were bestowing freedom to Native Americans. Tribal societies are much more freer than us. Like they have chiefs, but if the chief does something stupid, like we're going to go to war with that tribe over there, and there's a band full of warriors who are like, that would be dumb. The chief wouldn't have the ability within that social structure to tell those people, you either go to war or you're out of the tribe, or we're going to put you in a teepee where you'll have to stay. That'll be our prison. That would never happen in a tribe, because in a tribal society, you maintain your autonomy. Whereas, yeah, if our country goes to war and there's a draft and you refuse to fight, you can go to prison for that. Okay. But so what that's pointing to is that, okay, as civilization rose in a free society, in a society that is dedicated to natural rights, as John Locke put it, what happens is that we willingly give up some of our rights, our right to life, our right to liberty, and our right to freedom, to some extent to the government. As long as reasonably as the state, the government is to protect most of your rights. So what do I mean by that? So you have a right to your property, but can you reasonably expect, if you own a really cool stereo in your house and you have neighbors, to blast your stereo at 3 a.m., to not expect a police officer to knock on your door, right? Obviously, if the neighbor has to get up to work at 6 a.m. and you're blasting your stereo and it's bleeding into his house, his dwelling, he can call the police, and the police can knock on your door and they can issue a citation, or if the cop is cool saying you got a noise complaint, turn your stereo down. And if you don't, then the police can arrest you. So that's part of the social contract. Basically, to put it more succinctly, you have the right to do whatever you want within a society that is dedicated to natural rights, inalienable rights, as long as you're not infringing on somebody else's rights. That's the social contract. And what John Locke argued, as long as the government is upholding that, securing your rights, that's what that means, that, hey, if your neighbor is blasting your stereo, you have a right to peace and quiet, then, and they're doing that as legitimately as possible, as fairly as possible, and that's a legitimate government. The second a government begins to systematically kind of target people, groups of people, or just everybody collectively, and saying you're going to pay taxes because I say so, there's no law for it, or people getting gunned down in the streets, or being unlawfully attained without due process, John Locke argues that that government has lost its legitimacy. And the people now have a right to rebel or even overthrow that government. Yeah. Brittany.
I was gonna say that, don't you think that the government shouldn't have also like the ability to kind of infringe on your rights as far as online forums go?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We'll see where that goes. I don't know without me saying what I think about that. That's a conversation, because yeah, that now we're kind of, for a while, the internet has been the Wild West. And now we're starting to see that a little bit curtailed. And we saw this with the original networks, the airwaves, right? We collectively agreed whether it was the right thing to do. There were certain words you couldn't say on live television or even on recorded television, swear words, right? And we all more or less collectively agreed with that for decency of society. Some people didn't agree with that and pushed the envelope and things loosened up. So that's always a conversation. So some of those conversations might be, should a 12-year-old have access to TikTok? Like in a country like Australia, they've made that decision. I think you have to be 16 now to have social media. Yeah, maybe there is an argument there that social media really on a developing mind is probably not the best thing. So it depends on the situation, where that conversation goes, and for us to collectively go, I agree with that or I disagree with that. But yeah, I think what you might be leading to is, does
Well, really, will our government have more intervention when it comes to our online presence?
Yeah.
More so, I think what I was leaning more towards, because I think that that's going to happen. I think that if they're not already doing it with backing with scientists and data analysis, I think that that's already happening.
Yeah, in the state of Texas, if you want to view pornography, for example, now you have to upload your driver's license, which puts you on a government database that you're viewing pornography, right? So now collectively, we might be thinking there's this problem with pornography. It's breaking up marriages. There's young people who are being exposed to pornography. That's really messing up their expectations of sexual activity and marring their future. Maybe we just decide that, yeah, the government does have that authority because it's for the greater good. Maybe people disagree with that. Like, that's up for individuals to decide if they want to, some people, and that might be true. Some individuals could consume as much pornography as they want, and they have perfectly healthy sexual relationships, and it doesn't mess with them, and they are able to listen to their partners if they say, no, I don't want to do that, or whatever the conversation might be. Or maybe we decide that that's the exception to the rule. It does seem that this is causing a lot of dysfunction in human relationships, so let's curtail the ability for people to willy-nilly see pornography. But yeah, maybe that feature, like here in Texas, that you have to upload your driver's license to this government agency in order to view pornography. Well, maybe they might do that for the entire internet. And now government agencies can see that you are looking at this political perspective over that political perspective. And if we live in an age where there's authoritarianism, well, yeah, maybe people might be targeted for looking at a certain political perspective and consuming that over and over. And if you're tired, perfectly reasonable. That's why there's coffee, and that's why you have legs. You can stand up and do some squats, walk around, but there is no sleeping in this class, ever. So please do not put your head down. Put your head up so you do not fall asleep. We're talking about incredibly important issues in this course. So don't ever fall asleep in any college course. You have the ability to do this. This is your inalienable right. Oh, shit. Do that to wake yourself up, or you can get yourself a cup of coffee. Walk around. But yeah, don't fall asleep in a college class. We don't want to develop that class culture. Yeah, anybody else want to add to this?
I feel like going to the internet connection, I feel like some of the platforms are getting smarter because they can tell. I know my baby sister, she uses Roblox.
Yeah, that game. Yeah.
And now it says you need an ID, and I was like, oh shit. I was like,
Okay.
oh, I didn't know. She used to play it before, but now
Oh,
has to use,
okay. I didn't even realize that was the case.
Yeah,
that might be a Texas thing.
she has to use an ID that you literally show your ID.
Okay.
And sometimes I think they show she has to show her face on it because of
Yeah.
every Roblox is just like a weird game.
Now, that might be something Roblox is doing because predators might be on there trying to groom young people, because Roblox is for little kids typically. So that might be something that Roblox is running into trouble. So they just said, yeah, we got to make sure that only little kids are playing on this and we don't have some weirdos on there trying to groom little kids. Or that could be the state of Texas making that writ large. In order to use certain platforms, you got to upload your identification, which, you know, we might have a conversation if that's appropriate or appropriate not. If it's appropriate, then we're talking about the social contract. If it's not appropriate, and and what I'm getting at with that inappropriate and appropriate, if you have the practice of being disengaged with the society and are concerned that certain inalienable rights have been taken away, understand that it's not just one person that is doing it. It's not a group of people. We all have a responsibility in this. We are all at fault. This is the weirdest thing that human beings have ever done. Created a society of representative government that secures people who live there, not just citizens, their natural rights. That is weird. What is the default government of society, any group of people throughout human history? What type of government is the default government? Monarchy, or some type of authoritarian government, whether you call it a monarchy or dictatorship or whatever. That's the default government. That's the default government. And we did something very strange, as limited as it was back then, because obviously we can make, who wrote this document?
Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, how did he make his scratch, his money?
Slaves.
Yeah, he was a slave owner who's arguing that all men are created equal. So obviously back then, this is very limited, but just the fact that they made this possible, and absolutely very inspiring document. Enslaved people were reading this document or being told about this document back in the day, and were inspired by that. That's one of the strange things. One of the most interesting things about studying American history is that we have this founding document that makes this almost outrageous claim that all men are created equal. If you look at the course of history, clearly that, just practically speaking, that's not the case. There's always been very rich, powerful people, and then there's been people in service to those rich, powerful people. Whether you're talking about peasants or enslaved people or bureaucrats in service of the elite class. And there was no expectation of rights. To live in a monarchy, you weren't called a citizen, you were called a subject. You were subjected to the authority of the king. That's it. You live by the grace of the king. That's normal. That's what we have done in society as long as there's been civilization. And there's been pockets of time, like ancient Greece, where they've tried this, and other societies within civilization, and it's always failed. Why do you think it tends to fail? Or let me put it this way, what do you think is the reason why we tend to have authoritarian governments throughout history? Has to do with money, but money exists today, and at least we have an expectation that we have natural rights and representative government, and to some extent that's possible.
You ask the question again.
Yeah, why is it the default government authoritarianism? That must say something about the human animal.
Like to keep order.
Like a
Control
social,
state is
like
chaos.
mother and son.
Say again?
Like a mother and a son, like you have more authority over a child that is under you.
Yeah, and okay, well, let's pick let's target a family. Now, let's say we have a functional family where everybody's seen and listened to. There's still authority, right? Mom and dad are in charge. But in a healthy family, what happens that might not happen in a dysfunctional family?
Communication.
You have a head of the household. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, communication. Yeah, there's a head of the household. There's a father and mom.
Is it like to keep order?
Well, let's focus on what makes a functional household.
2 parents
2 parents,
and maybe a child.
you got like 4 or 5 children, and this is functional. It's a healthy household. And when you walk into that household, if you're not part of that family, you immediately recognize it. What would you recognize?
Well, shared powers and the exchange of powers within the partnership.
Yeah, exactly. People are seen, people are listened to, right? Mom and dad, when they go over the budget, it's not dad going, oh no. One, the fact that the wife and the husband are both going over their finances on a regular basis together, that's a healthy household. And if mom, the wife, says, I don't think we should be spending our money on that, the father, the husband, is going to listen, might not agree, saying, you don't want me to spend money on my hunting gear anymore? Well, here's why I think we should. And then the wife will say, well, you've got enough guns, you've got enough ammo, and our daughter, we don't have a college fund. You know, those kind of. What happens in an authoritarian family?
It would just be one person dictating all of that, not taking into consideration the others.
Yeah, not taking the consideration of the others, what they think, what they feel, not having conversations. Having one person in the context of our society is typically the husband, the father, who's making all the decisions financially about how the house looks and all of that.
Very biased.
Very biased, very authoritarian. And that's typically not a very healthy family. It's almost exclusively not a healthy family. So let's just focus not even on the children, but if you're in a traditional family where, yeah, dad is the head of the household, the wife submits, what do you think is going to happen in that marriage over the course of 5 years? How do you think the wife is going to engage in that marriage?
She's gonna start feeling not too appreciated.
Lack of trust, unfulfillment, no dependency.
Resentment.
Yeah.
This is where the nagging wife comes into play, because she's not going to just be like, well, I mean, maybe sometimes she'll just keep her head down and not say, but this is where nagging happens and arguments happen. If a wife is seen and heard and is contributing to the household, whether it's because she's employed or she is creating a healthy, clean home, everybody's being fed, whatever the case is, being seen as being appreciated, and she has a husband that has the ability to say, I was right or I was wrong, I'm sorry, I didn't take into your considerations into account on that decision, I'll try not to do that again, then a lot of that toxicity doesn't happen in the family household. People make mistakes, but yeah, if you have an authoritarian in the house, then this is where you have resentment, bitterness, nagging, cheating, infidelity, either from the husband or the wife. Yeah, if you're always wagging your finger at your wife and telling her what to do, and we're spending our money on this, and you don't get access to the checking account. Well, sometimes women are like, you know what? The pool guy looks pretty good out there, and I'm going to have an affair on you. Or the husband is like, man, she was so beautiful, and she used to think my jokes were funny, but 5 years has gone by, and she's always angry at me, and she's not fun. He's going to look elsewhere. And then the affair gets found out. Or even if it doesn't get found out, people have why is he acting so defensive? Where was he last night? And
It's like unspoken expectations.
yeah, exactly. So that's the family. So think about a society where people are just told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, what they can do, what they cannot do. And there is no ability to have you as an individual within that society, as a citizen, to have any input, whether through voting, whether through the ability to protest. I mean, that's North Korea. If you ever just get on YouTube and look at some news footage of those people are very strange. Not inherently strange, they're not born strange, but they live in fear. Right? To some extent, based on what we've been talking about in class, people are living in fear today. So just like a household, if you have an authoritarian who's ruling the household, everybody's in fear. And it's not functional. If you take the household and writ large it to a society, that society becomes dysfunctional. Why that tends to happen, though, I mean, the default government is authoritarianism. One, has anyone managed anything? Whether at a business, church, community service place?
Yes,
Yeah. What did you manage?
I oversaw people at work and during vacation Bible school.
Okay. So you had a certain degree of authority, right? Did everyone listen to you?
No.
Okay. Would it be easier if they listened to you?
Yes and no.
Okay, that's a healthy approach. But yeah, sometimes if you get a position of management, you're gonna find out that, dude, I told them to take the garbage out before they left and they never do that. You can go in and you either take the garbage out or you're fired. Oh, once you didn't take the garbage out, you're fired. You're being authoritarian there. And you're angry, you're mean, you're just yelling at people, you're demeaning them, you're insulting them.
They wouldn't know how to approach you.
Yeah, they don't know how to approach you. Now, if I did that in this classroom, was just yelling and shaming you guys, you didn't meet the deadline, there's something wrong with it. There's checks. You can go to my department chair and go, I don't know what's going on with that guy, but seems he's targeting me, or he is yelling at the entire class and shaming me. And I'm trying to do my best, right? There's checks. We have checks and balances in our government, right? President just can't do whatever he wants. Congress can't do whatever they want. Supreme Court can't do whatever they want. There's internal checks. It's one of the greatest virtues of the Constitution because that was put in. It's not always followed, but the Constitution is basically the rule book for our government. When the government seems to be violating our rights or not holding itself in check, we can go straight to the Constitution and begin participating in that and holding our government to account in any way we're able to. Protests, calling up our representatives, getting involved. And I really recommend you guys get involved. Otherwise, rights are just like, if you want muscles, you got to do push-ups, you got to lift weights. Rights, we exercise our rights. Otherwise, we get weak, and when they are threatened, we don't even know how to exercise them. So I hope this course gives us due course reason to understand the virtue of that. Because yeah, it's weird what's going on. It's wonderful what's going on in the course of our history. That's even an expectation that we have natural rights and a representative government. Despite how many shortcomings there have been. Huge shortcomings. The fact that we have that expectation is amazing. And it can be taken away, as we are seeing today, just like that, right? It's conceivable that 5 years from now, we could be in our living rooms going, remember when we were able to vote? That was cool. I never did, but it was cool that I was able to. Now we can't vote. That can happen. That happens in societies all the time. Or, to the very extent, remember when it seemed like our vote would count? Now it just seems like no way our vote counts. And if you're cynical thinking, no, our vote doesn't count, it has counted. We could talk about it later in that course. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay, well, let's take a brief break. So if you need to go to the bathroom, get something to stretch your legs. Let's get back about 17 after. That'll give us solid 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. So where we left off on Thursday. And while we're waiting, if anybody has any questions, let me know about the course. Mm.
For the.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Appreciate
What story?
it. Yeah. Big writing assignment, yeah.
Citations.
So don't think in citations, think in within the narrative of your short story you're referencing. So let's say you're going to quote somebody or explain an event that you're learning about within the bundle. At the end of that sentence, you want to put in parentheses, B1.1 Reconstruction. So I know where you're getting that quote or that event or that historical individual that you're getting that from. So that's the citation that you're doing, but no MLA or anything like that, because you're going to be typing your response, and I don't want to say that you have to follow some sort of form. Just that's to the extent you're following a format, you're just within your narrative explaining where you're getting this information within the bundle. Yeah, get some coffee. Coffee is there for everybody. Feels good when coffee's steaming. Oh, good question. Oh, very cool. So for this bundle, or
Yes.
okay.
I usually just do.
Okay, well, the first step is to let me quickly, and we could meet tomorrow because we're going to jump back into the class. But just to know what your first step is to go to the bundle one, open up bundle one. You're going to scroll down until you get to group projects. And then you have two options. You could either do this one or you can do this one. So identify as a group which one you want to do, either Reconstruction or Geography Empires. And then tomorrow we'll, because I have a class right after this, let's meet 5 minutes just to go over the expectations, go over the document so you have constructive questions if you have any questions. Because what I just want to make sure, especially the first time you do it, is that you don't come up here and just get a not complete. So I just want to make sure you understand what to do. So first step, figure out which one you want to do. And then second step is we'll go over the assignment. And then third step is we'll identify a date and time that you'll present.
We had agreed on the second option, the geographies.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, we're about to get started, but yeah, just open this up, go through the requirements, and then what you want to make sure, and we'll go over this a little bit more specifically tomorrow, is this is the outline of your presentation, these analytical categories for research, and for your presentation and for your handwritten summary.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, but if we were to do the group project for bundle one, that would not be today or tomorrow?
Oh, no. We could always go back and do this. In fact, that would be kind of cool if we're at the end of the session, we go back to Reconstruction because it refreshes our mind, or for Geographies and Empire. So those don't have due dates except for the end of the semester. And if you get them done, like if they do this one sometime this week or next week, that's before the mid-semester, they will receive 250 EDCMs as an incentive to get it out of the way.
Okay.
But yeah, very good that you guys are thinking about that. Okay, let's get back into it. Okay, we were here last time. So before we proceed forward, just a quick recap. We were basically talking about presidential reconstruction. And remember, presidential reconstruction first initiated by President Lincoln. He was making two arguments. One, the executive branch would be responsible for overseeing the process of reconstruction, not the Congress. And two, he made the argument that the South, the seceded states, were never out of the Union. He did that because he wants to make reconstruction, reunification of the Union as seamless as possible. Congress obviously is going to disagree with that. They think they should run the show. And it looks like President Lincoln is being way too lenient. He's just 10% of the population agrees to sign a loyalty oath and to honor the 13th Amendment, which is abolish slavery, and they're back in the Union. So leaders like Thaddeus Stevens disagree with that. And these group of people in Congress are referred to as radical Republicans. And they want to, for a variety of reasons, see that newly freed people who have just been freed from slavery, are not just free as virtue of the 13th Amendment that ends slavery, but have political rights. Some, very few, Thaddeus Stevens would be the exception to this. He did this because it was, from what we can tell, the right thing to do. Others are more practical about it. It's, this is kind of dangerous for society, just to unleash 4 million people and say they're free without giving them rights so they could be functional people of the society and access to employment and training and literacy skills. Others were very cynical politicians who were the Republicans are running the show at this time. The Democrats were mainly in the South. They were the ones that seceded from the Union. What an opportunity to really shove their nose into it. Like, okay, you want to secede from the Union and cause all this trouble, the Civil War? We're going to make you equal with black people, black men specifically, right? So you had those motivations. Now, Lincoln is going to get assassinated, and that opens up an opportunity for Congress. This is the second phase of Reconstruction, sometimes referred to as Congressional Reconstruction or Radical Reconstruction, where we see this energy unleashed through government to make sure that newly freed people get their rights. We saw that with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the 14th Amendment of 1868, and the 15th Amendment of 1870. And it worked, and that's what we're going to get into today. Black men are going to step into office. There's going to be a small but sizable middle class of people who were enslaved and now are making money. They're getting into the professional trades. And it's working. What is working against that is this culture of society going back to the colonial era that created an identity based on the color of people's skin. So white identity or white supremacy. And so white Southerners are going to be very resentful about this. It undermines their entire identity to see even just a few black families, black individuals taking advantage of these opportunities that are being made possible by government laws, like the Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. The Freedmen Bureau, which were schools, government-run schools that gave people literacy skills and basic trade skills that undermine their entire identity of white supremacy. Because as we talked about last time, if white supremacy is true, and it's not, but if it is true, even if non-white people are given these opportunities, what should happen is they should fail and fail miserably, because according to white supremacists, anybody who's not white is biologically inferior. And they're not, they're succeeding. So a lot of resentment is being built up. And this is one thing, despite the inspiration of radical Reconstruction, and this is something that Lincoln was worried about. So he wanted to go slow, which there's an argument to say that that was probably the wrong approach. And who knows what he would have done if he had lived, but he gets assassinated. But he wanted to go slow because he understood that historically, and he was a student of history, he was well read, that after a civil war, the people who win, because civil wars are brutal. I was just watching a documentary on Theodore Roosevelt, and Theodore Roosevelt's son fought in World War I. He was a fighter pilot, and his plane got shot down out of the sky, and he died. And this is a conventional war that I'm as contrasting a civil war. The German soldiers come across this pilot, and they see his name, Roosevelt, and they realize that this is the president's son, or the former president's son. And they gave him a formal burial, shots up in the ground, right, flag up, and they gave him the respect. So what I'm pointing at in a conventional war is that the soldiers on the ground really don't hate their enemy. The government told me to fight. I just want to live. I want to go home. So I'm fighting this war, but I don't hate these people. In a civil war, there's deep hatred for the enemy. You guys, whoever, everybody's pointing their finger at each other. We're killing each other. Our country's being destroyed because of what you thought, because of what you wanted. The South is thinking that of the Northerners. The Northerners, they get brutal. They get brutal. And whoever wins is pissed off, and they seek revenge, and they want to humiliate the other side. And this is what Lincoln was worried about. And so despite the inspiring things, what we're seeing by the time we get to the election of 1876 is this resentment is built up. And by 1876, despite is something that radical Republicans, the Congress does at first, they send troops in, they make it difficult for states to be readmitted back to the Union. But by the time we get to 1876, enough Southern states, almost all of them, have been readmitted back to the Union. And now white Southerners, Democrats, are beginning to hold office again. And we're beginning to see Democrats, white Democrats in the South, exerting their will, their power, and we're getting towards possibly another civil war. The election of 1876 was contested. Wasn't clear who won, so this is where we left off, right? Samuel Tilden is running as a Democrat. Rutherford B. Hayes is running as a Republican. It's unclear who won. So a committee of 15 meet in Congress, and they come up with what's referred to as the Compromise of 1877, mainly to prevent possibly another civil war happening in this country. So the Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes, will become president, and most important to the South is a return to home rule. So the remaining federal troops that Congress had sent to enforce the Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, and to make sure that vigilante groups weren't trying to kill newly freed people through groups like the KKK, they're going to be pulled out. The South the Democrats will get a postmaster general appointment to the cabinet, which back then was a real important position. This is how information flowed. And then the South will get promises from the federal government of infrastructure, mainly the railroad, and this promise of the New South. So that's where we left off.
Oh, thank you, sir.
That's where we left off. So we're going to explore the backlash against radical Reconstruction now. So these states, you see in these dates here, when they were readmitted back to the Union. So for example, Texas, the Civil War ended in 1865. Texas is not readmitted back into the Union until 5 years later. And conservative governments, that's referring to, and this sounds kind of weird to us today because it's flipped, but they're referring to the Democratic Party, right? So the Democratic Party takes power back in 1873 and so on and so forth for the other states. When that's happening, this is where we're beginning to see slowly, emphasis on slowly, a backlash against radical Reconstruction, the second phase. And now we're seeing the third phase of Reconstruction, which is redemption. And so we talked about that last time. That's a kind of a perversion of the word redemption. And we think of redemption almost on a personal basis. I redeemed myself. I was an alcoholic. I was somebody who couldn't hold a job, and I did the work, and I've redeemed myself. Redemption back in this day too, was more of a societal idea of redemption. And it goes back to biblical times, right? So the Jews had the Jubilee every 7 years. People's debts would get forgiven. How did that happen? Wealthy people would look around to people who were having a hard time and pay their debts. I was redeeming that person because that's what God would want from me, right? The basis of Christianity is based on redemption. Christ dies on the cross for the sake of humanity to redeem people's sins so they could perhaps have everlasting life within that narrative of Christianity. What the redeemers are using is what are they going to redeem for their society? Yeah, white supremacy. It's a complete perversion of the intent of what redemption was all about. Redemption has never been about trying to hurt other people. And white supremacy, by its very nature, by its very definition, is to hurt people. And that's what they intend to do. So here's this very popular political cartoon you would have seen back in the day, the Backlash, right? So the White League, this is a vigilante group, the KKK, they're joining forces in order to suppress people who look like that, right? Newly freed people, black folks. So what are they backlashing against? Well, they can't backlash against the 13th Amendment. That's part of the Constitution. And they can't really necessarily backlash against the 14th or 15th Amendment. So how do we work around that? Well, the 13th Amendment, what's problematic for white Southerners with the 13th Amendment is, particularly in the South where slavery was prevalent, is even if you didn't own slaves, and we talked about last time that most people didn't own slaves. Most white people didn't own slaves, but slavery was a constant reminder of what white supremacy was trying to argue. That even if you're a poor white person living in Alabama somewhere, you could look over at your neighbor's huge plantation and see black people working, doing all the work with no ability to ever benefit from their labor, the definition of slavery. That would remind you that even though you're a poor white person living in the South, and most white people in the South were poor white people, that I at least have my white skin. Well, with the elimination of slavery, that reminder is gone. And so what we'll see in this backlash is the slow beginning of Jim Crow segregation laws. 14th and 15th Amendment guarantee natural born. 14th Amendment guarantees natural born citizens their rights as citizens in this country. If you're born here, you're a citizen and you have rights. The 15th Amendment guarantees your right to vote. Now, state governments and local governments cannot violate that, but they're going to find creative ways of getting around that, as we'll see. Right? So, in short, redemption is an active backlash against radical reconstruction of the government. Just the very notion that these Yankees came down from the north and they put these funny ideas in black people's heads, and now we have to deal with the consequences, because there were consequences. There are black senators, there are black representatives, there are black mayors, there are black governors, there are black police officers, there are black judges. There's thousands of black men who were slaves just 5-6 years ago, holding public office at the federal, state, and local level. That ain't gonna fly with white Southerners who were born and raised by people they loved and trust, constantly reminding them that black people were inferior. And that's where we will see the backlash. So I'm gonna move through this slide. If you need to refer to this is posted in Pronto, but I wanna make sure we get through the entire backlash because it's important. Because basically what we're seeing here is sometimes referred to in history textbooks, I believe in your textbook, as a failed promise. Because if all of this stuff was upheld and black people were able to build up wealth in their communities and their families, a lot of the racial tensions that we're seeing today would be non-existent, and a lot of, frankly, the kind of tiresome talk of race would be over, right? Because this would have enculturated people differently. You might have been born and raised to think Black people are inferior, but if the government programs and laws were put in place and entrenched and weren't backlashed against, then generation after generation, you would have had families, Black families, that would have been able to generate wealth, maybe not a lot of wealth, in sometimes cases, a lot of wealth. That has consequences in society. People go to school, people follow the law, people are functional, contributing members of society. But if this stuff is all going to go away or be diminished to some degree, then yeah, you're going to have dysfunctional communities. You're going to have dysfunctional community individuals who are trying to survive in a society, but everything is working against them because of the social pathology of white supremacy. So this is just an example of some people who were enslaved, now senators, now House representatives, exerting political power, voting in Congress, in the Senate, in state assemblies. This is an example of how well-intended government policies and laws work. Sometimes, I mean, I think for our generation, your generation, even my generation, there's been example after example where government laws and policies do not work, despite their intentions. But if you have people of good faith who are trying to do the right thing, they work. This is amazing. I mean, these people were enslaved out in the fields working, and now they are in high positions of power that have consequences for society. This is a picture, if you can't see it very clearly from where you're at, but if you notice very carefully, it's about 50-50 Black and white people. This is a picture of the South Carolina state legislature. And that makes sense that they had a near parity, meaning equality of races in the state legislature, if not more Black people in the South legislature in the late 1860s and 1870s. South Carolina, more than any other state, had the most slaves. It was 50-1, or 2-1 Black people versus white people. Meaning there was 50% more Black people in South Carolina than there were white people in South Carolina due to the immense slave population. And so now that you have the 14th and 15th Amendment, these newly freed people are voting and they're putting people in their community, newly freed people, in public office. You got the Freedom Bureau too. This is, again, what Redeemers are going to backlash against. It was short-lived. It was around from 1865 to 1867, but it created a momentum and an infrastructure for newly freed people, predominantly newly freed people who, when they were enslaved, were illiterate. They're going to be taught to read and write. They're going to be given basic trade skills. And that's enough for them to hit the ground running, and for some of them to etch out themselves, at the very least, a middle-class existence. It's kind of the forerunner of community colleges. You can't afford to go to a university, well, you go to this school, and that might give you enough springboard to maybe go further in life, either opening up a business or going on to university. Same kind of principle. It's going to be short-lived. It's controversial because the question, besides should we be helping Black people, is did the federal government have this authority to even fund these schools? This maybe should be a states' rights kind of a thing. Well, it came out of the principle, again, even for people who might not, Republicans who might not have really cared about the plight of Black people or not newly freed people, just the idea of having 4 million people newly freed, uneducated, with no skills, that's dangerous. That's going to lead to trouble. So we got to deal with the reality on the ground and make sure these people can read and write and are carpenters or bricklayers or shipwrights or whatever the case is, and that they can make a living on their own to achieve the American dream so they can contribute to American society, whether we like it or not. It's basically a pragmatic approach. Oops. Let me skip this so we have time. But yeah, there is definitely, it should be stated, you don't have to write all of this down, but just understand there was a hunger to learn. So literacy rates literally went from 0 to 1% for most enslaved people throughout the South. By the time we get to the late 1800s to 90%. So there was this individual thirst to learn to read and write, and maintained within Black communities throughout the South. But then we get to this backlash. I don't know if you could, yeah, shoot, this, I should have a bigger picture of this. This is a very interesting cartoon. So yeah, it's in black and white and it's a small square. So let me kind of point out what's going on here. This is something that would show up in newspapers. And so what you see here is an incubus, a vampire, depicted as a Black man. Sharp teeth, huge claws, right? Wings. And can you see from where you're at what it says on his wings? Negro rule. So this is a cynical political cartoon that's reacting to radical Reconstruction or congressional Reconstruction. And if you're able to see this clearer, what his claws are going after are white women. That's a huge, like, taboo in society. That you got to keep your eyes on Black men and white women, because Black men in the social pathology of white supremacy aren't just sexual beings. They're extra sexual. They can't help themselves. And in the time, you know, white women are looked down upon. They don't have agency, and white women can't help themselves. So if they are alone with a Black man, they're just going to succumb to the spells of a Black vampire. So we got to protect our white women from their own, for their own benefit, because they just can't help themselves. When they're around a Black man, it's just, he's going to exude this sexuality that's going to put her under a spell. That comes from the colonial period. As you will learn from, this is 1302, but in 1301, what you learn about the plantations is rape was systematic, sexual assault was symptomatic. It was part and parcel of the plantation system. And so, in other words, plantation owners would go out and sexually assault the women that they owned and sometimes have children with them. And then they would ignore the fact that they had children with them, and they would just be used as property, and they could financially benefit from that. Now, if that got found out, what could a white wife do on a plantation about that? Nothing. Just what men do. Couldn't even really bring it up, because you can get beat up for that. You get thrown out, destitute. So if you read slave narratives in the antebellum period, a lot of enslaved people feared the mistress of the plantation more so than the man, the master of the plantation, because this would be typical of a woman on a plantation, the mistress of the plantation. She would be filled with resentment and be very embittered to the slaves, particularly young Black women. The inherent jealousy, because she would be suspect of any young woman who was relatively attractive, because her husband would be probably after her. Well, what could a white woman do? Really? Didn't happen. Maybe I don't know how often it would happen, but you're a mistress of a plantation, you're in your mid-20s, early 30s, you have a sexual appetite, you're pissed off at your husband because you know he's cheating. Some of those slave men look pretty good. They got muscles, they're attractive, so they would have secret affairs. And if that got found out, then all hell would break loose, right? And what women would claim is, he raped me, I fell under his spell, I couldn't help myself, because she's trying to protect herself, because consequences are dire. And so it creates a culture, this weird culture of this weird sexual taboo of male sexuality. So that's what's being depicted here. Going after white women, Negro rule. And if you look closely here, if you were able to look closely here, this is a ballot box. And where is he tied to? The ballot. He's got political power. So this is a cartoon that really encapsulates white angst, particularly in the South, about the successes of radical Reconstruction. And it cannot fly. So how are they going to get around particularly the 15th Amendment, which gives natural born citizens the right to vote, which is basically empowering Black men to vote, and with the consequences of them winning political office? Well, you can't just outright bar people from voting. You can't just say you can't vote anymore. So poll taxes. Elections cost money, so we're going to create a tax on elections. Well, even though I've said that there is a growing middle class in the Black South, understand most people are dirt poor. And so now if you are legally able to vote and it's a question of paying the poll tax or some bread, rent, you're going to obviously have to forego the ability to vote. And these poll taxes, where they emerge, and they don't emerge all at once, right? This begins in the late 1870s through the 1880s and 1890s and so on and so forth. But where they emerge, it's obviously administered by white officials, and they can, oh, white guy comes in, he can't afford it, don't worry about it. Black guy comes in, oh, you can't afford it? Sorry, man. I would really love for you to be able to vote. But you can't afford the poll tax, so you're not able to vote. Literacy tests. Now, sometimes you hear an argument for this because, yeah, you should be literate, be able to read and write so you can address the issues, know who's running, be able to research, know maybe a little bit about history. But the question is, well, who administers literacy tests? And we find literacy tests where they're passed locally, sometimes at the state level. You might be a well-read, educated Black man, and you're given a different type of test that nobody could pass. The white guy, who was the first president of the United States, George Washington, and you can give that to him verbally, it's going to be administered cynically with prejudice. Grandfather clause, you'll see this emerge in some local place. It's a really weird law and a really egregious law. If your grandfather was enslaved, you're uneligible to vote. Well, any newly freed person's grandfather was a slave, mostly in the South. So that disqualifies people from voting. Now understand, these laws are slightly just emerging here and there. There are Black officials who are pushing back against this. And so it's sort of a push and pull. And these things are being contested in the 1870s and 1880s. And you have segregation laws being imposed. So I talked about how the 13th Amendment eliminates not just slavery, but the reminder of how supreme white people are on the virtue of the color of their skin. Now that slavery is gone, how are we going to remind ourselves that white people are superior? Well, we're going to begin segregating the races. And this is not a picture of Homer Plessy, but this is probably what he looked like. This is actually the governor of Louisiana, which was the same type of person as far as race is concerned. He is an octoroon, 1/8 Black. Oct, like 8, it's 1/8 Black. And so segregation laws have begun to emerge as early as the late 1870s. Drinking fountains, right? Schools, theaters, right? Where they first emerged was the railroads. And the reason why they first emerged on the railroads is if you get a first class ticket on a railroad, you don't have any ability to choose who you sit next to, right? So whoever could afford the ticket can be on the nice, comfortable railroad car, nice, comfortable seats, nice service, right? Dignified service, if you could afford it. So what was happening on the railroads is, yeah, you would have Black men, and this is how Homer Plessy would be depicted in the press. That's not what he looked like. He looked more like this. White, he could pass, in other words. Pass as a white guy. Well, you're there with your pretty little wife, right? And you got a first class ticket and a black man, and if you see here, he's dressed very well, sits down, he sits right next to your wife. Now, with all of the weirdness of white supremacy, that's going to be really threatening to a white man. And this is where fights and riots would break out. So almost obviously out of white supremacy, but almost out of service of protecting the public, we began seeing segregation on the railroads. And this is beginning in the late 1870s, 1880s, pockets of it, sometimes at the local level, sometimes at the state level. And so this guy, Homer Plessy, is going to challenge this law in Louisiana. He looks white. He's going to buy a first class ticket. He's going to tell the conductor, I'm an octoroon, I'm a black man, because it's a one drop of blood and you're not white kind of idea. And he's going to be thrown off the train. So he's going to go to Louisiana Superior Court. He's going to lose, and he's going to go to the Supreme Court to challenge this law. And he's sort of a Rosa Parks kind of figure, because he could pass, right? So he's doing this politically. He's not just, oh, I happen to get thrown off a train because I'm black. He's doing this to point out how ridiculous these laws are. Look at me. If you look at me, I look white, and yet I am being thrown off a train. These laws are ridiculous. It obviously violates the 14th Amendment. So this is how he's depicted in the press. So Homer Plessy's taking this to the Supreme Court. Taking this to the Supreme Court. And this is how he's being depicted in the press. Look what's going on in this picture. This one you can probably see. What's going on in this picture?
Woman is looking to the black man.
Yeah. How is she looking at him?
I can't tell if she's smiling.
She has
It's
a,
like smirking.
Attracted.
she's attracted to him. What does she have in her hands?
A baby.
A child.
A baby. She can't even help herself. A young mom can't even help herself when she's around a black man.
In
This-
front of her husband.
And that's her husband, who's really pissed off. Right? And if you know anything about Irish immigrants, he's being depicted as an Irish immigrant. The Irish were looked down almost as much as black people. So when you had race riots, it was typically between black men and Irish men. And the reason for that is Irish people were virulent racists, not because there was something wrong with being Irish and that made them racist. They were competing for the same types of jobs. And so if you're an employer, it'd be very easy to get a cheap labor pool. Who's going to work for the cheapest wages? If black people are going to work for the cheapest wages, then I'm going to hire black folks. If Irish people will do it. So these people are in tension with each other. So this would have been understood of, yeah, we can't have Irish people who are trying to pass as white, weren't considered white at this time, but they're trying to pass as white, getting all pissed off, trying to protect their wives when a black man is on there. So let's not make sure Homer Plessy wins this case. And he's not going to win this case. Now, if he had won this case, Homer Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896. Homer versus Plessy. 1896. If he had won this case, he's not. Then that would have been, that's in the Supreme Court. If he had won this case, then all of the local laws, all of the state laws that were segregating the races, it would have been declared unconstitutional and they would have had to reverse those laws. But he's not. And so the significance of this law, it's pretty damning. Because at first, the pushback against radical Reconstruction is only happening at the local and state level. And so what's significant about the Homer Plessy case is that it marks the beginning of when the federal government now is going, okay, we're not here to uphold the Constitution and protect all citizens and people who live here. There is going to be first-class citizens and there will be second-class citizens. If you ain't white, you are a second-class citizen. It's not just black people, it's anybody, right? So this is significant because it's the Supreme Court upholding segregation laws that are first being passed at the local and state level. And so just going forward, you're going to see that this is what's going to happen about 100 years later. People are going to protest, try to maintain this idea of states' rights. So white people in the 1950s are going to try to protect this, right? This is what happens about 100 years later, after all of this has been entrenched in society. What's going to reverse homoplessy is Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. And that's what you're seeing being enacted right here. Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. And that reversed homoplessy, one of the most egregious cases of the Supreme Court. And Brown versus Board of Education, because what homoplessy case said is, as long as the facilities are equal, then you can have separate facilities for the races. Well, that was never the intention, right? And so what Brown versus Board of Education, what the lawyers are able to argue who are trying to dismantle homo versus plessy is having separate facilities is inherently unequal. That was the intention. And so in 1954, it's erased. And what you're seeing here is the federal government, because after 1954, local and state governments need to reverse segregation. White Democrats, governors in the 1950s are absolutely not. We're not going to reverse segregation. So the president at the time, President Eisenhower, to make sure the checks and balances are being enforced and states aren't trying to undermine the authority of the federal government. On the principle of that, Eisenhower was no friend to Black people. He wasn't an egregious white supremacist, but he was a white person living at the time in the 1950s. He can't have states defying the federal government, so he's sending in the National Guard to protect these school children who are going to schools that are being desegregated. This is a very famous picture, iconic picture. This is Elizabeth Eckerd, who is trying to go to school. She's about 14, and you can see what white women are doing around this 14-year-old girl. You probably guess what she's saying to her right at that moment. That's captured and goes back then, they wouldn't say it back then, but this goes viral. And this becomes deeply embarrassing to Hazel Brown. And although she kind of maintains white identity, she does end up apologizing to Elizabeth Eckerd and her family for being so just disgusting and mean. And she, it is sort of a story of redemption, but this is just kind of pointing out the legacy of Homer versus Plessy and how it got dismantled. But to go back to the time, this is what you would begin to see emerging. This is from Texas, El Paso, that sign right there. This is what you would begin to see all over the South, including here in Texas, right? Now, we don't have too much time to go into what Jim Crow is, but for purposes of time, let me just explain. Jim Crow is what's referred to as a minstrel character. That's an advertisement for a minstrel show, where this is the first national entertainment craze, where white people at first would put very dark black makeup on, red lipstick, and pretend like they were Black and act very silly and stereotypical and entertain white audiences. It reinforced white prejudice about how inferior Black people, the first national craze, and it bled into 20th century entertainment. So this, and one of the characters in the minstrel show was called Jim Crow. So another character would be the Zip Coon. Zip Coon would be a rich Black person that you want to keep your eye on. Jim Crow is a kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, kind of Black guy. Didn't mean no harm, but mischievous. Got to keep your eye on him, right, as you have to with all Black people. Uncle Tom, right? Always the helpful servant to the white master, on a ridiculous way, basically. The mammy, always in service to the mistress, kind of desexualized, just this woman who was just there to make sure that, these stereotypical things, pickaninnies, basically these mischievous children who didn't mean no harm, but are always kind of rambunctious. The buck, this is a character from the minstrel shows, literally using bestiality language. Buck comes from the idea of the auctions of selling off people. So if you were a young black man being sold as a slave, you would be referred to as a buck, meaning you could use this guy to breed with. He's got good genes. They wouldn't use that word back then, but he's going to give you good, strong slaves if you mate him with a good, strong sow, a woman, right? That kind of language. So we don't have time to go into that. That's an interesting thing. What I want to make time for is the lynchings that happen. This will carry us out through the rest of the class. So poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, segregation, they did have an effect. And mainly, it's beginning to diminish the amount of black men holding public office. But how many black men holding public office is tolerable for a white supremacist society?
Zero.
None. Zero.
You're supposed to be inferior.
They're supposed to be inferior. And if they're holding office, that kind of lets us gives us a hint that white supremacy is nonsense. So what's most effective to put black people and non-white people in general back in their place is violence. Lynchings. So what you're seeing there is a picture of a guy, his name was Sam Hose. He was an itinerant worker, a handyman, who worked for a guy named Al Cranford. And Al Cranford and him got into an argument. Apparently, Sam Hose's mom was dying, and he wanted some time off and advance in his pay. Well, Al Cranford, being just a white person and white supremacist, took offense to this, and they got in an argument. And at the time, Sam Hose was chopping wood for Al Cranford, had an axe in his hand. And in the course of this argument, according to the press, that's important to understand, threw the axe at him, lodged in his forehead, and he fell down. He was bleeding out. And then he went into Al Cranford's home, grabbed out Betty Cranford, Al Cranford's wife, and raped her as Al Cranford was dying. And so then Sam Hose flees the scene. And a mob of 5,000 white people are on the lookout for him, and they find him. And what I'm about to explain is going to be very disturbing, but it's important to understand that these lynchings became very ritualistic as well as common. And what I'm about to describe is part of the ritual of lynchings, because they don't just grab somebody and kill them. They're going to torture him. And so they tie him to a stake, strip him of his clothes, pour kerosene all over him because they intend to burn him to death. But before they're going to burn him to death, which is bad enough, they take pliers and cut off his fingers. They cut off his toes. They cut off his genitalia. They make an incision on his forehead and flay the skin off of his face. They light the match. And apparently he got an adrenaline rush and broke free from the restraints. So they put the fire out, re-restrained him, lit the match again, poured more kerosene all over him. And his dying words were, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Now, I'm able to tell you that in detail because the press covered it. Not for the reasons you might suspect at first. Because the reason you might suspect is the press was out there going, this atrocity is happening. This needs to stop. The press is covering it for people who aren't able to attend this, so they can know what happened, because a bad black man justice was served. This guy raped a white woman. And that cannot stand. So 2 independent investigations were done, one by the local sheriff, who was no friend to black people probably, and another by a very successful journalist who was born enslaved when I think she was 4 years old when the 13th Amendment was ratified. But now she's a very famous journalist who has been investigating these lynchings. And she investigates this one, and what she found is what happened was and she talked to Betty Cranford. Yeah, they got in an argument, and her husband pointed a shotgun at him. And so he did have an axe in his hand, and out of self-defense, he threw the axe and ran away, and it lodged in his forehead, and he died. So he did kill Al Cranford. That is true, but it could be argued it was in self-defense, because if someone's pointing a gun at you, you have to take them seriously, right? So, and then everything else that followed did happen. And this is going to happen again and again and again all over the South. So what is a lynching? Well, and how did they happen? About 150 people were lynched per year. The peak was in 1892 with 232 people. 1892 corresponds with an economic depression. And typically when the economy took a downturn, lynchings went up, because back then, especially back then for white men, your duty as a man, as a husband, was to protect and provide. Well, during economic protection, it makes it difficult to provide, but you certainly can protect. And this is the way they would protect. Right? People are not prosecuted for these lynchings. No one's prosecuted until 1915, and that would have been an exception to the rule. Most people aren't even arrested. And these would be the offenses: disrespecting a white man or woman, shoplifting, drunkenness, homicide, raping a white woman. And so if any of these crimes, I mean, this isn't a crime, you could disrespect people. It's not cool to disrespect people, but, you know, disrespecting people meant that you didn't get off the sidewalk if a white person was approaching you. Or taking offense if another man called you boy and you're a full grown man, right? And then you might say, would you call me a boy? I'm not a boy, I'm a man. How dare you, that's disrespecting white man. None of these, and what's really egregious about these, and obviously so, there's no due process. People are just accused of crimes, the mob goes after them, and then they're tortured in the way I just explained. So this is Ida B. Wells, right? She's the one who investigates a lot of these lynchings. Eventually, her press gets burnt down in Memphis, Tennessee, and she has to flee to New York City for the rest of her life, right? Because she's making this known that these lynchings are happening all over the South. Let's understand too, I'm just kind of going through this, but you've heard of this organization. If you haven't, it's the NAACP. They were created to bring awareness to lynchings, right? You see the sign there, a man was lynched yesterday. That was outside of their headquarters. So I'm going to go through this, and we'll leave today's class with oh no. It got removed from. Okay, well, tomorrow, get ready. I'm going to show you depictions of lynchings. Hold on. I still got you for 10 minutes. But we got to this. Let me set this up. Lynchings corresponded not just with economic downturns, they also corresponded with elections. So elections coming up, and lo and behold, another lynching happened. It was clear communication that maybe you don't show up to vote, because that could happen to you or a family member. And it was very effective. This person here that I skipped over, yeah, George Henry White, he introduces a federal piece of legislation that would make lynching a federal offense, which isn't going to happen until we get into the 2020s. It just happened recently. And the reason why it needs to be a federal offense, according to George Lynch and anyone who advocates for it, is that the very few cases where people were prosecuted for lynchings, well, what do you afford to
have a lawyer?
Did somebody say something we have internet students?
That's me. You hire a good lawyer because you can afford
to. You hire a good lawyer and you get a jury of your peers.
Of white people.
Yeah. So if you're accused of a crime, you get a good lawyer because maybe you have money, or maybe the community can, raise money for you if you don't have money. And yeah, your jury are people you go to church with or work with. Nobody's going to prosecute you. You're going to be, lo and behold, despite the evidence, innocent every single time. So if you have it at a federal offense, well, then you can take the person who is being prosecuted and take them to a federal court outside of a jury. He still gets a jury, but maybe these people will be a little bit more impartial in their decision because they don't personally know this person. And I will have to dig up the lynching video. But yeah, understand how they corresponded. The other thing I want to point out, so we can set this up for tomorrow, is you're going to see images of lynchings, and I apologize for this, but the images of lynchings, understand what they're being posted on. Postcards. So you would lynch somebody. Picture. Yeah, that's a photograph. This was put on a postcard. You notice something peculiar about the people who have perpetrated this horrific act on this person?
They're smiling.
Yeah. They don't believe in their heads or their hearts that they've done anything wrong. That's terrifying. That's terrifying not just because this poor man was needlessly tortured and murdered, but if they can conceive that this is the right thing to do, then what's to stop you? If you're enculturated in a certain way, everyone you love and trust that has raised you to tell you that we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, this horrible thing. Yeah, this is what's really strange about being the human animal, is a lot of stuff can be excused. And this is not just, there are thousands of these photographs out there that have been preserved and archived. It's horrible. Okay. One thing I want to bring to your attention is to set us up for tomorrow beyond the lynching video. Is for tomorrow. Preparing for tomorrow. So I have a lecture prepared for tomorrow. We're moving fast, so we're going to jump into the Industrial Revolution and the labor movement and all of that. Hold on, you might want to take note on this. Just focus. I still got you for 5 minutes. To prepare for tomorrow, please review the chapters, and you've gone through the chapters in Bundle 1 for a C, and identify what you find most interesting, along with noting these 3 points of interest. Be sure to link them to specific references from the readings from the chapters, such as dates, historical figures, events, and concepts. Participating can lead to EDCM opportunities. So not a huge assignment. It's not even an assignment. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I don't want to necessarily be the sage on the stage. I don't mind doing it. Right? I've got lectures prepared. I know them pretty well, so I can constantly just lecture. But to the degree that I can get some participation. So if you find something interesting, note that, and then just give us a few facts about it, dates, people associated with what you found interesting, so you can talk with some authority on it. You don't have to be a scholar. You might even be wrong a little bit, and I'll point that out. Oh yeah, that's somewhat right, but we also have to consider that kind of a thing. But that might help us have a broader conversation about the Industrial Revolution, the labor movement, and what eventually leads to the progressive era. Yes, Jesus.
So we don't have to answer it on the pronto?
No. Oh, you could do that. If you saw that on Pronto, you can do that there. But in class, just write down some notes as you're reading through chapters 14 through 17. If you already read it, go back. I found this interesting. Be cool for me to find what you think is interesting, because what you find interesting, I might not have found interesting. But the fact that you found it interesting, now I'm going to find it interesting. Right? Because there's a lot to read. And so collectively, we can kind of point out to some stuff. So keep that in mind for tomorrow. And other than that, July 14th, if you haven't started Bundle 1 for a C, now's the time. It's due tomorrow. If you're working on it, get through it. And for those that have done with Bundle 1 for a C, keep working on Bundle 1 for a B or an A. Thank you for the student. I didn't see who that was, but thank you for participating. Glad you were here. This recording will be available sometime today, tomorrow, so you can review it if you need to review it.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. It's Sophia.
Yeah, thank you. Stop recording.